Welcome back to Crime Podcastle. It's episode 4.
Yeah.
And tonight we're going to be diving deep into a case that's both chilling and strangely compelling.
Yeah.
The Stoneman murders.
Oh, yeah.
You've probably heard whispers of this one. A series of brutal killings of homeless individuals in Kolkata and Mumbai, India, back in the 1980s.
Right.
What makes this case so captivating, you ask? Well, for starters, it remains unsolved to this day. And the mystery surrounding the killer, dubbed Stoneman Castleman, has generated a lasting fear that still hangs over those cities.
For sure.
We're going to unpack all of this from Stoneman.pdf, and hopefully by the end we'll all be a little bit closer to understanding this perplexing case.
What's fascinating here is how the case sits right on that blurry line between true crime and urban legend. You have these brutal, very real murders.
Yeah.
And yet the lack of any concrete answers creates a space where speculation and fear run wild.
It's like the mystery itself becomes a character in the story.
Exactly. And it all starts in Kolkata in 1985. Imagine you're walking through this bustling city with its vibrant street life, but beneath that surface, there's a hidden vulnerability, especially for those living on the margins of society.
And that's where the Stoneman's victims were found, among Kolkata's homeless population. These were people who already faced immense challenges every single day. And then suddenly they become targets of this brutal and seemingly random violence.
The first murder, as detailed in the source material, was particularly horrific. A homeless man was found dead, his skull crushed by a large stone. The sheer brutality of it, it's hard to even fathom.
I keep coming back to the fear those communities must have felt. How do you even begin to process that each night, the threat of violence hanging over you, not knowing when or where the Stoneman might strike next?
And as more bodies were discovered, all killed in the same horrific way that fear would have only intensified, this wasn't just about taking a life. It felt like a message was being sent. The brutality, the choice of weapon, the fact that the stone was often left right there at the scene, it all points to something more, something beyond a simple act of violence.
It almost feels deliberate, like a signature. But if they were sending a message, who were they trying to reach? Was it the city as a whole, the authorities, or were they trying to communicate something to the world through these horrific acts?
That's a question that has haunted investigators for decades. And then, just as abruptly as it began, the killing spree stopped. No suspects, no leads, just a chilling silence left in the wake of such unimaginable terror. But as you probably guessed, the story doesn't end there.
Yeah, this is where it takes an even more unsettling turn. Fast forward 4 years to 1989, and the terror resurfaces this time in Mumbai, another sprawling metropolis on the opposite side of the country.
Think about it, a new city hundreds of miles away, yet the same chilling pattern emerges: homeless victims, the stone as a weapon, the nighttime attacks.
Wow.
It's like a nightmare that just won't go away.
Mumbai, the city that never sleeps, suddenly had a new reason to fear the night.
Yeah.
As the body count rose, so did the panic. The source material described how people were afraid to go out after dark, and those living on the streets had to constantly look over their shoulders. You can really see how this fear reshaped the city.
Absolutely, and the police were completely baffled. They increased patrols, tried to track down any possible leads,
Right.
but it was like chasing a ghost.
But if it wasn't a transient worker, then the question becomes, did the Stoneman know the city intimately? Someone who understood police patterns? Maybe even knew how to exploit weaknesses in their investigations.
Precisely, think about the details. The killings always happened at night, in areas where the homeless population was concentrated. This suggests someone with a certain level of familiarity with the victim's routines and the city's layout.
Okay, but wouldn't a local killer have been identified by someone even eventually? I mean, even the most careful criminal makes mistakes.
That's a valid point, and it's one of the many contradictions that make this case so difficult to decipher.
So was this a copycat killer? Or did whatever force drove the Stoneman in Kolkata somehow migrate to Mumbai?
That's what everyone was trying to figure out. The speculation must have been rampant, and of course you have the rumors and whispers of supernatural forces at play, the kind of things that thrive in the shadows of fear and uncertainty. But before we get too lost in the speculation, let's take a step back and look at the facts. What do we know for sure?
We know that the Stoneman targeted the most vulnerable members of society.
Right.
We know the weapon of choice was a stone, and the attacks were brutal and seemingly random. We know the killings stopped abruptly in both cities, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a legacy of fear.
Exactly. And I think that's a good place to pause for now. We've laid the groundwork, you've gotten a feel for the case, and next we can start digging into some of the theories surrounding the Stoneman's identity and motives. Maybe then we can get closer to understanding the why behind these horrifying
All
acts.
right, sounds good. So where do we even begin to unravel a mystery like this? I mean, the Stoneman seemed to vanish into thin air. How do you track down a ghost?
Well, you start by looking for patterns for any clues that might point to a possible motive or identity. And one theory that comes up again and again is the idea that the Stoneman was a transient laborer, someone passing through these cities.
Someone who moved from city to city, maybe following work opportunities, that would explain how the killings could start in Kolkata, stop abruptly,
Yeah.
and then pick up again years later in Mumbai. If the Stoneman wasn't rooted in one place, it would make it incredibly difficult to track.
Right. It's like trying to catch smoke. And the source material actually mentions how both Kolkata and Mumbai were major hubs for migrant workers back then. You have a large transient population coming and going all the time. It would be easy for someone to blend in, commit a crime, and then disappear without a trace.
But that begs the question, what would drive a transient worker to commit these kinds of murders? Were they lashing out at a society that had marginalized them? Was it some twisted form of revenge?
Those are possibilities, of course. But we have to be careful not to fall into the trap of easy answers. The truth is, we just don't know. The source material doesn't offer any insights into the Stoneman's psychology, and without that, it's all just speculation.
Okay, so if we entertain the idea that it wasn't a transient worker,
Mm.
what are some of the other theories out there?
Well, another possibility is that the Stoneman was actually someone local, someone who knew the cities well enough to evade capture, someone who understood police patterns, maybe even knew how to exploit weaknesses in their investigations.
Hold on, are we saying this could have been someone with inside knowledge, like someone who knew how the system worked and could use that to their advantage?
Yeah.
That's a chilling thought.
It is, isn't it? And this theory would also explain why the killings eventually stopped. If the Stonemen felt the pressure from law enforcement increasing, they might have simply gone into hiding, waiting for things to cool down.
Which means they could still be out there somewhere.
That's the unsettling reality of unsolved cases, isn't it? The questions linger, the doubt remains, and sometimes the fear never truly goes away. But beyond these theories about the Stoneman's identity, there's another aspect of this case I find particularly intriguing.
Whoa, what's that?
The choice of weapon, the stone. It's such a primitive, brutal instrument, and the fact that it was often left at the scene, it almost feels ritualistic, like they were trying to send a very specific kind of message.
It's like a calling card, you're right.
Yeah.
But what does it tell us about the killer? What kind of person chooses a stone as their weapon?
That's where things get really interesting. We have to think about the psychology behind it. Was it an act of rage, a raw expression of anger, or could have been something more calculated, a deliberate attempt to inflict pain and terror?
I guess you'd have to consider things like anger, rage, maybe even a sense of powerlessness that manifests in this very physical, very violent act.
Exactly. And then there's the fact that the victims were all homeless. These were people who were already vulnerable, often ignored, overlooked by society. Was there an element of resentment or hatred directed at this particular group?
That's a tough question, but the source material does highlight how the Stoneman murders cast a long shadow over both Kolkata and Mumbai. They created a climate of fear, especially among those living on the streets. People were terrified to be out alone at night, especially if they were homeless.
Absolutely. The impact went far beyond the immediate victims. It changed the way people perceive their own cities, their sense of safety and security. Imagine living with that kind of fear, constantly looking over your shoulder, never knowing when or where the next attack might come.
It's heartbreaking, and the fact that the case remains unsolved only adds to the unease.
It's like a wound that never fully heals. The lack of closure, the absence of answers, it all feeds into the fear and the mystery. And that brings us to another point, the MO. You familiar with that term?
I think I've heard it on crime shows, but refresh my memory. What exactly does MO mean?
MO stands for modus operandi, basically the killer's method of operation. It's the distinct pattern or signature they follow when committing their crimes. In this case, the Stoneman's MO was incredibly consistent. Nighttime attacks a stone as the weapon targeting homeless individuals. It's almost like a blueprint for terror.
And understanding that MO, are you saying that could be the key to cracking the case?
It could be analyzing the MO can help investigators profile the killer, understand their motivations, and potentially predict their next move. It's like trying to get inside the killer's mind to see the world through their eyes.
That's a pretty intense thought, but I guess if anyone's going to catch this ghost, they need to understand how it thinks. It's hard to shake the feeling that the Stoneman murders, even though they happened decades ago, still have something to teach us.
I agree, and I think one of the most important lessons is about the vulnerability of marginalized communities.
Yeah.
The fact that the Stonemen targeted the homeless people who are already struggling to survive really underscores that point.
You're right. These were individuals who often existed on the fringes of society, overlooked and forgotten. And their deaths, while tragic, didn't seem to generate the same level of public outcry or media attention as other high-profile cases.
It's like their lives and their deaths were somehow less significant because of their social standing.
Which is a deeply disturbing thought.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about the biases we all carry consciously or not.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that justice isn't always blind. It can be influenced by social factors, by who the victims were, and by how much their lives are perceived to be worth.
It's a sobering reminder that we need to do better to advocate for the vulnerable and demand justice for all, regardless of their circumstances.
Absolutely. And beyond the social implications, this case also raises questions about the nature of evil, about what drives someone to commit such horrific acts.
We talked about some of the possible psychological factors earlier, but the truth is, we may never truly understand the depths of the Stoneman's darkness, and that's part of what makes this case so haunting. The lack of closure, the absence of a clear motive, it all feeds into the fear and the mystery.
It makes you think, how do you guard against something you don't understand? How do you protect yourself from an enemy you can't even identify?
Those are questions that have plagued investigators, journalists, and even armchair detectives for years. And I suspect they'll continue to do so long after we're gone. The Stoneman murders have become a part of urban legend, a chilling tale whispered in the shadows of these two great cities.
A reminder that even in the midst of bustling crowds and bright lights, darkness can lurk and evil can strike in the most unexpected ways.
For sure.
It's a story that stays with you, makes you question things.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
So we've explored the facts of the case, delved into some of the possible theories, and considered the wider social and psychological implications. What are your thoughts? What stood out to you about this case? Any theories brewing in your mind?
Do you think we'll ever get definitive answers, or will this remain one of India's most enduring mysteries? Let us know in the comments. We always love hearing your thoughts.
And as always, thanks for joining us on this journey into the dark heart of the Stoneman murders.
Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into the most fascinating and chilling cases from around the world. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep those lights on.